So last Friday, I went to this exhibition called Collective Osmosis by the artist Oscar Murillo in Minsk in Potsdam, which is 25 kilometers away from Berlin. And before visiting the exhibition, I attended a public conversation between the artist and the curator and writer, who also contributed with a text to the exhibition's catalog, in which he described the narrative surrounding decolonial perspectives, collective memory, and broader discourses on community and shared cultural production. So I took a few notes during the conversation, and after in the exhibition, when I got home, I read the exhibition catalog, and I also took a few notes, and now I can do a bit of critique about it. The first thing he said when starting the conversation is that his work is based around the idea of finding spaces of beauty in this current moment, in these times. And he also talked about the concept of darkness a lot, which I'll get to that later. So the premise was, how do we find beauty in these times of darkness? And when he talks about darkness, two things come to my mind. One is grieving, and the other one is settler colonialism and settler violence. And I think it's important that I mention this from the beginning because Murillo frames his work under the post colonial category. And I always ask this question, why is it always post colonial and not anti colonial? And this is relevant because then I opened the booklet and I saw that in 2013 he had collaborated with Israeli educational institutions. Going back to the conversation between the writer and him, I mentioned that the reason the exhibition was called Collective Osmosis is related to the fact that we have not succeeded in destroying the Amazons because of a Sahara wind that carries specific minerals that basically sustain the plants and the jungle's ecosystem of the Amazons. And this is basically what the process of osmosis means. It's like a movement of water that balances solute concentrations and regulates water balance in organisms, facilitating processes like nutrient absorption in plants and plant roots and kidney functions, for example, in animals. It's also interesting to realize that this wind coming from the Sahara and feeding the Amazons against imperialist deforestation proves how nature and indigenous sovereignty can actually resist colonial violence. And this Saharan wind comes from the same Sahara where Western Saharan people have been able to resist Moroccan colonial occupation through the knowledge they have of the land and the weather and the desert ecosystem. So I think if, as an artist, you want to be serious about post-colonialism, you really have to be loud about things like these. Going back to talking about his work in a more descriptive way, he has different formats that go between painting, installation, and archive. Personally, the most interesting part of his work, and for what I saw in the exhibition, is the canvases that he displays around different places in different parts of the world, but specifically the ones he displays in schools. So basically, he puts these textile canvases on different sites in schools with kids aged 9 to 16 and just asks them to interact and draw or paint on the canvases. And he also does this in other places across the globe, like parks and squares. And then he talks about the park as a placeholder for community. And then this whole process of people all over the world intervening the canvases, he calls it social mapping. He also described the canvas as a physical object, as a holder of people coming together and the many folds and layers to embody the idea of something that cannot be controlled. And people who have never met are communicating through these layers of messages without even like meeting or knowing each other. And this is very interesting to me because it also challenges the concept of authorship in the art context and the art world. And then he also talks about the things that people write or paint on the canvases as a vestige of their daily lives. So when you see these canvases in the exhibition, you are absorbing so much information coming from all over the world. And how this information is processed is through the museum as a vessel that contains all of this data. And when you're putting this canvas in front of someone, you are asking them to intervene it, and you're asking them to tell you a story or a memory or something that is rooted in their own personal story. So what he does with all of these canvases in the museum is he puts them in shelves all together, folded like an archive. And I feel like in this there is a desire to destroy this kind of traditionalist, fetishistic relation to the archive and instead think about it as a database. And I did see this especially in the kids' canvases, in which one can imagine all of these kids as vessels who are downloading all of this collective data around the globe onto the canvases. And then we, as the public, begin to mine that data once it arrives at the museum. And when you connect together the different canvases, you make a tapestry that creates a stream of consciousness. And then the kind of strata that develops from the canvases, either from the own artist painting over the already intervened canvases or other people from other places, because the canvases move around also. So people add layers to what's already uh, people who have already painted on them. And this is a way of, sewing together relations or new redistributions, which Murillo describes as unmapping and as a way of destroying borders. Murillo also questions the fact that his work is exhibited basically in the epicenter of power, which is Germany, among other places. And in the conversation he had, he said that he faces heavy challenges around censorship and frictions, but that it's also the time to be here and serve the landscape and prompt reflection in, again, what he mentions is dark times. Another relevant fact is that Murillo is put in conversation with the internationally acclaimed impressionist artist Claude Monet. So in the exhibition, we also see a display of three original Monets, which are, if I understood correctly, part of the permanent collection of the Barberini Museum, which is the partnered institution with Das Minsk. And what was interesting to me here was the different ways he justified the presence of Monet in the exhibition. Because when you read the exhibition's catalog, you get a sense that the common denominator is how Monet captures scenarios with light and water in them, and this is relevant to the osmosis process and the unmapping process. And then he also brings the issue of Monet's cataracts that he developed in 1923, which obviously had an impact on how he developed his work after that, and how he had to work through this kind of darkness. And Murillo talks about finding spaces of beauty in the darkness. In the exhibition, the three Monet paintings are surrounded by a textile installation piece of Murillo, which is basically just some black canvases falling from the ceiling and creating like corridors. And yeah, he states that he situates Monet historical paintings in the context of political, social, and ecological events. The way Murillo talked about Monet in the conversation had an added layer because he said he was using him as a shield because of the German context. So he literally said that he was scared of being shot in the head without the presence of Monet. And what I got from that is that he was basically saying Germany's too racist to have a Colombian artist speaking against borders in a solo exhibition. So he kind of described Monet as a protector to bring everyone into the conversation. Now, going back to the initial question regarding why would he bring his canvases to Israeli institutions, again, this is a contradiction unless you use that material to express an actual anti colonial stand because your work evolves around children, about their drawings, their ideas, their collective imaginary. You can't just state on the catalog that you visited Palestine and Israel and unleash it to the public without a concrete position. And I honestly don't think it's fair to the Palestinian children that collaborated in the project because by the end of the conversation, he was talking about the artist Frank Bowling as one of his biggest inspirations, who is a 92-year-old British artist from Guyana, born in the early 30s, who became active from the 50s to the late 90s and was not represented by major galleries but had little shows in London. And in 2023, Murillo went into one of his shows and bumped into him and then had an inspiring conversation about his work. And Bowling's main format is also painting. And he has this kind of nostalgia maps, which are a homage to Latin America and also a homage to things that have been said about his generation in Guyana and how it ended in the UK. And Murillo talked about his work, saying that there is something represented in this nostalgia that Bowling depicts in the way he emotionally captures things through color, the same way Murillo does. And again, you cannot avoid the topic of colonialism if you want to talk about these topics. So, looking back on it all, Collective Osmosis is definitely a beautiful experience. But by sticking to this softer post colonial label instead of taking a harder anti colonial stand, he kind of leaves the most important questions unanswered. And In the end, I think we need more than just finding beauty in the dark, and we need to be brave enough to name who's bursting the light bulbs and who's holding the flashlights.
It's a dangerous place, and you don't know how to behave.